Let me tell you, there are people out there who don't just walk into a room. They change the air the second they show up. You feel it before you can even pin down what's different. Catherine Zeta-Jones is that kind of person. Always has been. Even as a kid, back in Swansea, Wales, standing on some tiny stage, she already had this spark you couldn't ignore, like she was made for more than anyone could imagine. We all watched her, right? She lit up Chicago, danced through the Mask of Zorro, racked up an Oscar, a Tony, a BAFTA. Like collecting trophies was just another line on her checklist. She married Michael Douglas, stood beaming on red carpets, made it look so effortless you'd think luck just followed her around. She pulled people in. She was wildly beautiful, sure, but there was more. She seemed to shine. By every external measure, she was living the kind of life most people dare to dream about. But, you know, dreams have a way of only showing us their glossiest surface, their best moments on repeat. What we almost never get to see is what's really going on. All the raw, messy pieces that happen when the lights aren't blazing and nobody is watching. That's where the story really gets interesting. Because behind Catherine's dazzling smile was a battle hidden from every camera lens and flashing bulb. Something so private, so unreachable, it couldn't be fixed or even touched by any amount of applause or fame. So, today, we're pulling that curtain back. Fair warning, what's on the other side isn't glamorous. It's not the kind of story Hollywood likes to wrap in a bow, all neatly resolved. It's gritty, it's tough, and if I'm honest, it's also deeply inspiring. Let's hit rewind for a second. Before any of the movies, before the awards, before she was a headline, there was just Catherine. September 1969, Swansea, Wales. Her dad ran a candy factory. Her mom stitched clothes to help put food on the table. No silver spoons. No family friends in Hollywood. No phone calls that would get her through the door. Not even close. But there was Catherine, this kid with some otherworldly drive. 9 years old, on a random community stage, and the people watching her swear she wasn't just acting, she was arriving, almost like she knew something they hadn't figured out yet. And then, by the age of 15, she did something honestly wild. She left her home, her friends, everything she knew, and moved to London. Just like that. Most teens stress out over exams or picking the right shoes for school. Catherine struck out on her own, chasing a life in the theater. Those first years, let's just say they weren't filled with dazzling lights. She worked her way through chorus lines, regional tours, cold nights trying to warm up half-filled theaters. She was ignored, looked over, worked harder than anyone should have to, but she kept showing up. And then, almost out of nowhere, Darling Buds of May happened, and suddenly all of Britain was glued to her. Not just watching, totally captivated. Hollywood noticed too. By the mid-90s, she was on her way to LA, carrying that same determination that took her out of Swansea. The world really caught on with The Mask of Zorro in '98, and then Entrapment. People realized she wasn't just a pretty face, she had the talent, and with movies like Traffic, she proved it for good. Then came Chicago in 2002. Velma Kelly. That performance didn't just impress people, it floored them. The Oscar was almost inevitable at that point. The girl from the candy shop was on top of the world. Now ask yourself, would you have done what she did at 15? Left everything behind to run after a dream with no map, no guarantees? Or would you have stayed, hoping the breaks just might come to you? Seriously, I want to know. Tell me in the comments, I actually read them. But let's get back to Catherine. Because here's what those glossy magazine covers never showed. The same intense energy that made her such a force on screen also made just existing, day in and day out, a real challenge. People who worked with her in her peak years talk about someone who felt things at a different volume, turned up far past what most of us ever reach. Moments of joy so big, they'd sweep her away. Creativity that couldn't be contained. But after the highs, there were lows, not dramatic for the world to see, just quiet stretches where it took everything she had to keep moving forward. Sometimes she'd wake up with the world at her feet and still couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. Some weeks she'd be unstoppable, then would fall into something she didn't even have words for. On screen, Catherine had it all. What no one saw was how hard she was fighting every single day just to make it look so easy. And if you're thinking, that must be the hardest part, buckle up. There's more to this story, and trust me, it only gets more real from here. Back in 1998, when Catherine Zeta-Jones met Michael Douglas on the set of The Mask of Zorro, it really was a moment that set the gossip columns buzzing. Douglas was 25 years older, and honestly, that gap alone, plus his Hollywood legacy, fueled all kinds of speculation. He wasn't just famous. His name got you into any room, any party, any deal. People watched Catherine and Michael's romance unfold with a mix of disbelief and intrigue. The age difference, the blend of her Welsh roots and his Hollywood dynasty, everyone seemed to agree it shouldn't work. But somehow it did. Their wedding in November 2000 felt epic, almost royal. The world practically crowned them. Every magazine had their photos on the cover, and suddenly they weren't just celebrities, they were icons, the couple everyone wanted to root for. At least from afar, it looked like a perfect life. But nothing about Catherine's life was simple. Behind all those glamorous photos, her reality was relentless. She was filming non-stop, crisscrossing continents for press tours, juggling marriage and motherhood, while the world had opinions about every step she took. Their son Dylan came in 2000, their daughter Karis in 2003. Somehow, she managed to be everywhere at once, smiling, flawless, never showing a crack. But I wonder, when someone seems to pull off everything effortlessly, does that really mean they're okay? Or have they just become experts at hiding the struggle? Catherine definitely wasn't immune to that cost. It crept up on her quietly. There was a stalker, not for a week, not for a season, but for years, forcing her family into a kind of hypervigilance that no amount of money could soften. Then there was the press, obsessively dissecting her every move and appearance, the kind of nitpicking cruelty reserved most often, and most viciously, for women who dare to succeed and look good doing it. And Michael, as loving as he was, his fame meant they lived in the public eye, under a microscope that never blinked. And beneath all that, Catherine kept battling her moods, usually in silence. There were periods where she had boundless energy. She could work ridiculous hours, walk into any room and command attention, ideas flying faster than anybody else could keep up. Everyone admired her drive. In Hollywood, that kind of relentless energy isn't seen as a warning sign, it's basically required. But after those manic stretches, the energy would drop out. Suddenly, everything felt heavy. Sleep couldn't fix it. Even the joy of her children didn't break that fog. She later explained it in a way that stopped me cold. She said there were days she couldn't understand her own feelings, and that not knowing terrified her more than anything else. Even so, she kept working, kept smiling, kept showing up. Because once the world decides you're invincible, what else can you do? Then, in 2010, everything shifted. Michael was diagnosed with throat cancer. Suddenly, Catherine found herself at the center of a family crisis, all while expected to show unwavering grace in public. And she did, with poise, with devotion, with everything the cameras wanted to see. But behind closed doors, she was falling apart. Honestly, if you've ever had to hold it together for someone else while you felt like you were breaking inside, you know what she was facing. Share your story if you want, because you're definitely not alone. For years, Catherine had outrun every challenge, but now she faced one that didn't come from critics or circumstances. It was inside her. In 2011, she decided it was time to stop hiding. And you need to hear what she did next, because it took real guts, more than any role she'd played. So, in the spring of 2011, Catherine Zeta-Jones went public about something Hollywood almost never lets happen. She told the truth. Through her publicist, she admitted she checked herself into Silver Hill Hospital in Connecticut for treatment for bipolar II disorder. No spin, no attempts to soften the message, no cleverly worded statement. Just a quiet, honest admission. One that stunned an industry obsessed with managing its image. People reacted fast and honestly, pretty unevenly. Some praised her courage, others whispered it was career suicide. The tabloids couldn't make up their minds. Was she heroic, or was she unraveling? Sympathy and sensationalism in equal measure. And here's what really hits me. This was 2011. not that long ago, and Catherine, at the literal top of her game, was worried, justifiably, that being honest about her mental health could ruin everything she'd built. So, what does that tell us? About her, sure, but more about the world she lived in. Bipolar 2 isn't the wild, dramatic swings Hollywood likes to show us. It's quieter, sneakier. The upside, hypomania, looks almost positive. Tons of energy, sharp focus, low need for sleep, creativity on fire. For someone in show business, it can feel like a superpower. But the crash, the depression, is brutal. It's not visible to anyone, yet it drains everything. For Catherine, finally having a name for what she'd experienced was relief and heartbreak all at once. She could finally describe what had happened to her for years, but couldn't help but grieve all the time she'd lost fighting something she'd never understood. The hospital stay wasn't glamorous. It was therapy, medication, learning to spot her own warning signs, work that can't be done on a film set, work that means sitting with yourself, being honest, vulnerable, letting people see the parts of you that don't fit the perfect public mold. When she left, she wasn't fixed. Bipolar 2 doesn't get fixed. But she had a new steadiness. She seemed brighter, lighter, grounded in a way she hadn't been for a long time. Then came the next, truly brave move. She spoke out. She was clear, open, unashamed. There is no need to suffer silently. There is no shame in seeking help. In a culture where vulnerability is often staged and rehearsed, Catherine gave the world something real, unvarnished, unperformed, and rare. So, let me ask you, when's the last time someone told the truth about what they're struggling with? When they did, how did it change things for you? Let's talk honestly about one of Hollywood's favorite lies, the myth of recovery. You've seen it. Someone hits a crisis, checks themselves into treatment, does the required soul-bearing interviews, steps back into the spotlight with a polished grin and a heartfelt sentiment, and just like that, the story is apparently over. Problem solved. Cue the triumphant music, roll the credits, and move right along. But life, real life, doesn't tie up so neatly. Catherine knew that better than anyone. When she returned to the public eye in late 2011, she did it cautiously. No grand sweeping comeback, just a slow, thoughtful reappearance. She went to events, gave well-measured interviews, and from the outside she seemed well. The media painted her as the comeback queen, fell down, got back up, stronger than ever. What they didn't want to admit was the reality of bipolar 2. It doesn't care about narratives, and it never promises a clean finish line. So, in 2013, just 2 years after her first stay in the hospital, Catherine was back at Silver Hill. This time there was less cheering, fewer glowing profiles about her bravery. Instead, the world got a little quieter, aware now that these struggles don't wrap up after one heroic act. This wasn't some brief dramatic subplot. This was her life, a humbling daily challenge that demanded discipline, support, honesty, and constant self-awareness. Here's what gets under my skin. People shower praise on someone the first time they seek help. There's a wave of headlines, endless commentary, loads of admiration. But what about after that? What about the second, or even the third time? Does it take more courage to ask for help again than it did the very first time? Personally, I wonder about that a lot. What do you think? Genuinely, let me know. Between 2013 and 2017, Catherine stayed mostly out of the highlight reels. She kept working, and to the outside world, her career machine just kept churning. But friends say she was quietly and furiously studying her own life. She learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, which environments left her drained, which schedules nudged her too close to hypomania, and which situations made the fall into depression steeper and faster. And that's something most people just can't grasp about living with bipolar 2 at her level. It's not just a matter of popping a pill or showing up to therapy, even though both are non-negotiable cornerstones. It's a constant act of vigilance. You're always tuning in to your body's rhythms, watching, adjusting, trying to interpret the early warnings, and making changes before the rest of the world even senses a ripple. On top of all this, she was supporting her husband, Michael, through his own recovery from cancer. Two people, two parallel recoveries, both bringing all their resolve, fear, and hope, trying to parent and keep a private life while the spotlights burned bright. In 2013, things cracked, at least from the outside. They separated. Of course, the tabloids spun it into their favorite kind of disaster, the golden couple, crumbling. But here's what nobody could see. Sometimes, stepping away from someone you love isn't failure, it's honesty. It's understanding that real healing sometimes only grows in space, that love alone can't provide. The story didn't end there. Real stories rarely do. They reconciled in 2014. No magazine spreads, no crafted statements, just private conversations and the slow choice to build something new, together. Those close to them say their marriage became something real, something earned. Less about appearances, more about truth. Two people who chose to stay and fight for each other, not because the cameras demanded it, but because the connection did. When Catherine talks about Michael lately, there's something different. A softness, a depth you don't often hear in celebrity soundbites. "He is my partner in every sense," she said recently. Not just in life, in survival. That word, survival, carries a different meaning when you know what they've both endured. If you had to score it out of 10, how much do you think the public truly understands what goes into holding a famous marriage together? I'd really like to know. Give me your number. Now, around 2016, another shift happened, but nothing dramatic. She didn't hold a press conference or post a long goodbye on social media. She just faded, slowly. Less red carpet, fewer interviews. The headlines, guessed at career decline, spinned tales of quiet retreat. That's what Hollywood does when a woman steps out of the spotlight. They treat it like disappearance, a slow, sad, dwindling away. But the reality? They missed the point entirely. Ever had a moment where stepping back wasn't defeat, but the bravest, smartest move you could make? I have, and I bet a lot of you have too. Drop your story if you want. I'm always interested. For Catherine, these quieter years were about taking control for the first time. She rebuilt her life brick by brick, determined to design routines and priorities that made real stability possible. Before, the breakneck speed of her business had never allowed real space for that. Bipolar 2, after all, simply can't thrive in chaos, not with jet lag, 20-hour days, and the constant scrutiny of millions of eyes. Hollywood frankly rewards the opposite: unpredictability, overwork, emotional extremes. Catherine had spent too many years trying to fit her healing into that system. 2 hospitalizations served as her wake-up calls. The quieter years that followed, that was her answer. She started picking projects that supported her health instead of chipping away at it. She placed daily practices, therapy, medication, good sleep, movement, all the little safeguards, at the heart of her routine, not as temporary fixes, but as permanent anchors. She built up something lasting. A life where her illness had a place, where it could be managed rather than denied, or battled endlessly. And somewhere in there, she got to actually be present, not just for work, but for her kids, Dylan and Karis, in the small, everyday ways that matter most to kids, and that celebrity usually steals from parents. She could show up for Michael too, through the unhurried moments of his recovery. Sometimes, more than anything, she was finally present just for herself. People who collaborated with her describe someone transformed. Quieter, yes, but sharper and more assured. She set clearer boundaries, refused to court situations that would drain her, and stood up for her own well-being like never before. You know, in Hollywood, a woman protecting her own peace instead of performing for the spotlight is almost a revolutionary act. She wasn't fading away. She was, for the first time in years, actively choosing her life rather than letting it pick her apart. And if you're curious where that choice eventually led her, stick around. The story is far from over. Back in 2018, Hollywood had a name for what was happening to Catherine Zeta-Jones. They called it a comeback. Reporters jumped on it. Headlines shouted about her return, painting her as some lost star Hollywood had graciously decided to rediscover, as if she'd been missing in action. Honestly, she took it all in stride. She didn't rush to correct anyone, just smiled quietly and let the commotion swirl around her. But the people who actually knew Catherine saw right through the headlines. This wasn't some simple comeback like something broken finally got fixed and rolled out brand new. They understood the difference. What Catherine was doing was something else. She was stepping back into the public eye, but this time, entirely on her own terms. She had found a stability she'd never had before, a clarity about her own boundaries and identity that earlier chapters of her career hadn't allowed. That's the thing. Coming back is about picking up where you left off. Coming back differently? That's about really confronting yourself, figuring out your limits and your truth. And let's be real, that takes guts. Her roles during this phase made it clear right out of the gate. Catherine picked parts that were messy, flawed, layered, and physically tough, in ways that had nothing to do with being glamorous, and everything to do with digging deep into the craft. She wasn't playing the princess, or the timeless beauty. She was channeling characters with real wounds, contradictions, the sort of inner turmoil only someone who's done sincere personal work can channel. Not everyone has that kind of access to themselves. Critics noticed, but not with giant flashes or breathless Oscar buzz. Instead, they recognized her for something subtler. They saw that she was doing some of her most powerful work, maybe precisely because she wasn't hiding behind Hollywood armor anymore. Therapy, discipline, and honest reckoning had stripped away all that protection. But what replaced it wasn't just surface-level vulnerability. You know, those glossy confessions that get carefully approved for interviews and magazine spreads, meticulously orchestrated to tug on heartstrings or chase sympathy. No, Catherine's vulnerability was quieter, deeper, solid. She let herself be seen as an actual person, not a product or a carefully curated character. And she shifted her platform in a big way. Where interviews once revolved around promotions and appearances, Catherine started opening up about mental health, especially her own experience living with bipolar II. She talked about treatment, consistency, and the need for open conversations. She spoke to media that reached young people, using that famous name to kick open doors for conversations she wished someone had started when she was younger. She said, "I'm not defined by my diagnosis, but I'm also not going to pretend it's not part of me. It is." And if saying that out loud helps one person feel less alone, then it's worth saying every single time. That wasn't a line crafted by her publicist. That was Catherine herself, speaking after years of cost and struggle, finally knowing who she was. So, I've got to ask, what's the one thing Catherine's journey has made you rethink? Drop your thoughts below. I see them all. Jump forward to 2024. Catherine turns 55. She's not doing the Hollywood thing, glammed up photos with headlines about being ageless, hinting that a woman's greatest achievement is fooling the calendar. Catherine's taken a much more radical route. She's simply chosen to be exactly who she is, right where she is. The woman you see now isn't the sharp-edged Velma Kelly from 2002, all shining energy and armor. She's quieter, more deliberate. You notice the stillness about her now, a quality that only comes from years of doing the internal work. Those in the know realize it's not about getting older or fading away. It's about discipline. It's about gaining peace, not losing relevance. Whenever you hear about a public figure becoming less visible, what's your first thought? Most people assume something's wrong, but they're usually off the mark. Catherine's reality these days is nothing like what fame promised. It's not smaller, it's just genuinely different. Her mornings aren't ruled by scripts or frantic schedules. They're about stability and self-care. She's got rituals, medication, movement, fiercely protecting her sleep, because bipolar II makes that both fragile and essential. Therapy isn't a one-off crisis fix. It's a routine, a daily practice to keep centered. She's learned stability isn't some destination you reach, it's something you have to work for every single day. Her marriage to Michael, after more than 20 years, is textured by everything they've survived together. They don't come out untouched or unchanged, but they're intact. Michael said, "She's the strongest person I know. Not because she doesn't struggle, because she never stops." That kind of love has a different shape after years walking through illness together. Dylan is in his mid-20s now. Karis is nearly grown up. Those kids, for whom Catherine rearranged her whole career, they're adults now. And there's this bittersweet shift, especially for someone whose identity as a mother has anchored her for years. Catherine's still working, just more selectively and on her own terms. Her production company chooses projects that spark her creativity, not just ones that shore up her brand. She shows up in public when she wants, and she's shaped her relationship with visibility into something completely different from what Hollywood originally dictated. But here's the hardest truth about this phase. It's not a neatly wrapped story. Bipolar 2 doesn't go away. There's no ending where the illness is vanquished, and everybody applauds. She's got her tools, her support system, her routines, and the quiet courage to keep living with something most will never fully understand. Meanwhile, the world keeps watching but rarely sees what's really going on. Every day, Catherine carries something invisible. She carries it gracefully, honestly, and not for show. It's just real. If you felt moved by her story, if it's changed how you think about someone in your life who might be living with something unseen, share this message, not for clicks, not for numbers. Share it for them. There is a version of Catherine Zeta-Jones that the world constructed and consumed for decades. The version with the impossible hair and the Oscar and the famous husband and the life that looked from every available angle like the answer to every question ambition had ever asked. That version was real. The talent was real. The achievements were real. The beauty was real. But it was never the whole story. The whole story is this. A girl from Swansea who left everything familiar at 15 because she believed, with a certainty that had absolutely no evidence yet to support it, that she was meant for something larger. Who crossed an ocean and built a legend and stood on stages her younger self could not have imagined, and who did all of it while carrying in silence, and then in courage, a condition that could have quietly dismantled everything she built. It didn't, not because bipolar 2 is easy to manage, not because fame provides any insulation from the hardest aspects of mental illness, but because Catherine Zeta-Jones made a choice. Repeatedly, unglamorously, without cameras. To do the work, to seek help when she needed it, to return when she needed to return, to speak when silence would have been safer and more comfortable and infinitely more acceptable to an industry that has always preferred its stars looking unbroken. That choice, to be honest about struggle, in a world that rewards the performance of strength, is her greatest role, and it required more courage than anything she has ever filmed. Her legacy in entertainment is secure. Chicago will be watched by people who were not yet born when she filmed it. The Tony, the Oscar, the BAFTA, they are permanent markers of genuine, undeniable craft. But the legacy that matters most, the one that will outlast every award and every headline, is quieter than all of that. It lives in every person who watched her walk into Silver Hill in 2011 and felt, for the first time, that their own struggle had been seen by someone the world considered invincible. It lives in every young woman who heard her say, "There is no shame in seeking help," and found in those words the permission she had been waiting for. It lives in every conversation her honesty made possible, in doctors' offices, in family kitchens, in the private, terrified moments when someone decides that asking for help is not weakness. It is survival. That is what Catherine Zeta-Jones leaves behind. Not the image, the truth. At 55, she is not who Hollywood made her. She is who she made herself, through loss and recovery and relapse and reconciliation, and the daily invisible discipline of a woman who simply refuses to be defined by either her diagnosis or her fame. She is still here, choosing every single morning to continue. And I want to leave you with one final question. Not about Catherine, about you. Is there something you have been carrying in silence that deserves the same courage she showed? Because if her story has taught us anything at all, it is that the bravest thing you can do is not perform strength. It is ask for help. If this video moved you, subscribe. Because every week we bring you the stories behind the stories, the truth beneath the image, the human being inside the legend. And if you know someone who needs to hear Catherine's story today, please share it with them. They may need it more than you know.